Good morning, volunteers and students and all of the team who have been busy working through the night. Hopefully some of our competing students in the semi-finals have made it through and got some sleep. We received quite a few decision documents quite late in the day, but hopefully everyone's managed to catch a few hours of sleep and go from there. And we'll start the competition shortly. But it's my pleasure, first of all, to launch day 2 with a keynote session. And I'm delighted to use the power of the virtual age that we can have a keynote all the way over from the west coast of the US to kick us off as Paul's about to head towards the end of his day. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Paul Vixie, Chief Executive Officer of Farsight Security, an internet pioneer with all of his work with regards to DNS. And I know that one of Paul's team is going to be running a workshop later on today on threat hunting with DNS. But also Paul is not only the Chief Exec of Farsight, he's also an Internet Hall of Famer. So we're delighted that we can have Paul with us today to open up day 2 of the competition. Thank you very much for your support, Paul, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm really glad this competition has been organized. So thank all of you who put it together. This is a really important thing that we had better do if we want a better future than the present we're getting. And it's my honor to be here. And if airplanes would allow me to land in the United Kingdom, I would have tried to be there in person. So maybe next time. So I only have a few minutes and I want to use them wisely. So I'm going to get my face off the screen and all right. Right. So very briefly, what I want to try to talk about is, there we go. Situational awareness at a cultural and epoch level, right? It's all very well and good to know what your situation is when you're in a fight, but what is your situation as it was when you were born and as it will be during your lifetime? That is something we don't take enough time to think about, and it turns out it matters. So I'm going to keep this as brief as I can. Hopefully we'll have a few minutes for questions. So one way to look at cybersecurity or cyber attacks and cyber defense is as a series of discrete activities. By discrete, I mean that they begin and they occur and then they end. And they end differently, maybe, depending on how you end them. If you defend early, then they end early. If you defend late, then correspondingly, they will end late. I think this is the wrong way to look at it. Nothing that we do, nothing I have done in my decades of experience trying to secure this internet thing has been discrete. It's all continuous. Everybody is trying to get what advantage they can all the time against as many victims as they can or against as many attackers as they are hearing from. And it doesn't start. There isn't a middle, there isn't an end. So this is really the wrong way to look at it. And so if you hear from somebody from the Cold War who thinks that this is the way it works, it's not. On the other hand, you could take a continuous view. You could say, well, okay, we understand that everybody is trying to do everything all the time. And whatever they're doing is simply trying to feed into the next thing that they intend to do, which is roughly predictable along these lines. And the OODA loop, as it's called, is it comes out of aerial combat from warplanes. And it has to do with where you can position yourself in the sky relative to somebody else. And if you can observe, orient, decide, and act faster than they do, then you're probably going to survive the engagement, unlike them. And so speed is very much the cultural essence of the OODA loop. And we always talk about getting inside of the other guy's OODA loop. Well, this comes from warfare. And this is not the way our world works either. And so if you run into an unreconstituted Cold Warrior who wants to tell you about the OODA loop, you should ask them, was this a tactical doctrine or a strategic doctrine, and which of those most closely approximates what I have to do to protect my nation or my company or my family online? You'll get some interesting answers, I predict. So let's remember the domains of operation. And to be a domain of operation in this context means that you might dominate, let's say, land. You are the dominant force. You have the ability to project force better than anyone else can on the land that you're on. And so you're winning until somebody comes along with a new domain of operation. They come at you from the sea. And it turns out you're not as strong there. And so somebody, by advancing the ticker from domain 1 to domain 2, they can maybe get ascendancy until somebody will advance the ticker again to air. And you see where this is going. What I want to point out is that we're in the 5th domain now, information, and it is the most potent of all domains. I got to say that at no time during any conflict, whether civil or warfare, was it possible for somebody to use a weapon that would cause maybe the hallways in your headquarters building to reconfigure themselves so they were no longer to your advantage. But in the information realm, they absolutely have that power. That weapon exists. That weapon will always exist. So it's a very different situation. And strangely, it has some things in common with submarine warfare. In submarine warfare, what's happening, yes, it's in the sea, but it's a different type of the sea domain. What's happening is not visible. So there's nobody taking pictures. It's not going to show up on the nightly news broadcast. It's not going to be in the newspapers. You might have some engagement in the submarine warfare realm that nobody ever knows about, except people with very secret clearances inside their governments. And that is also true of information. There's a tremendous amount of information warfare going on all the time. And unless you were involved, you probably don't know, or unless it hit the newspapers in some way. You look at this recent thing with SolarWinds, and you can see how this goes when it becomes the topic for people on the talking heads on the screen. But we are much more like submarine warfare than we are like any other domain of operation that has ever occurred. And we have to sort of recognize that. Attribution might never be had. You might lose an asset and never know who took it from you. You might be successfully attacked and not be able to figure out who did it, or you know who did it, but you can't prove it, or you know who did it, but you can't reveal the methods by which you know it, therefore you can't reveal what you know. So this is curious because it's the most important and most powerful domain of operations ever, and yet it is the thing about which the least will be known. Now, I want to sort of call your attention to complexity, right? So this is the law of large numbers applied to risk. So if you just, treat N and M, top of the fraction is how much you understand, and the bottom of the fraction is how much you got to deal with, you'll understand that you only understand a fraction of what you need to understand in order to sort of predict your own risks or manage them. We are perpetually increasing Q and only Q. We do not increase N. So we are adding complexity. We are adding new systems or variables that must be understood, but usually are not. And thus, our fraction of understanding keeps going down. But it turns out that that fraction inversely predicts our risk. And so the less we know, the more risk we are at. And I got to say that nothing in the history that I have read, nothing anywhere in recorded history, shows an example of something being built better than it had to be. I mean, yes, onesie twosie, craftsman somewhere, the hobbyist, whatever, but at scale by industry, across an era? No, we're going to find whatever is the minimum level of quality that will get the job done and get us home to supper, and we're going to do that. And that's been going on a very long time. That is why everything is such a pile of wreckage that causes cyber risk to be just all over the place where you least expect it. So I could go on at length with examples of that, but I won't. But I want to talk a little bit about you guys, the competitors. Every generation picks a few things that their ancestors were putting up with, and they say, you know, that was stupid. You guys should never have put up with that. We're not going to put up with that. That changes here. That changes now. That ends with you. And that is your role. Every generation does that. Probably every new set of teenagers thinks that they invented sex, wonders how they could possibly exist because their parents would never have understood, what to do with that. But not just that, which is a cheeky example, but just about everything gets re-examined by every new generation. And thank God it is so. So I want you to understand, we have been doing this miracle engineering. We've been living with complexity that creates untenable, intolerable risks, but we tolerate them anyway. We have learned to tolerate things. And I want you to be where that ends. I want you to say, you guys, you were nuts. You did this wrong. You put up with stuff you shouldn't have put up with, that we are not going to put up with. And this finally is what Robert Heinlein would no doubt advise you if he were here. It's possible that you can come into the success that brought you to this competition and think that what you need to know is math and hard science and possibly some political theory, maybe some economics, and that you don't understand why you should spend any time figuring out the rest. Well, the reason is that economics, which is the heart of war, is also the activity of humans. So if you want to understand what humans are doing to each other, to you, to your cities, to your countries, your companies, your families, you're going to need to know how they work. So I hope that you're in a cohort of other people that got here the same way you did, so that if anybody hears you say, yeah, I don't need to understand philosophy or psychology or biology or any of that other fuzzy stuff in order to succeed at this, I hope that your cohort is full of people who will pull you back from that edge and put you back inside of yourself and say, actually, no, the specialization is for insects. You got to know all of this if you want to move the needle on human history during your time in the driver's seat, which is starting pretty much now. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Paul. I'll ask the floor if there's any comments to offer up, and we'll get some questions in from there. But I think one of the reflections I'd like to pick out on your key points is fantastic, that correlates so well with the aspirations and the objectives of the competition. For us, it's about empowering the students with an experiential learning activity during the competition, to give them that chance to practice this agility, to deal with that complexity, to ask those questions that you've raised so eloquently with regards to, what does this mean with respect to attribution? What does this mean with respect to how the organization can respond and can act and conduct itself? And one of the other areas that we're really keen with the competition is to bring that diversity to the problem and to make that multidisciplinary approach as standard. And for our students, it's about encouraging them to not necessarily solely focus on the technical, but to consider the perspectives and the critical challenge that other disciplines can contribute towards contribute towards the actual achievement of the objectives in the scenario and the decision briefs we often give. So a lot of our students are represented both from the cybersecurity disciplines at universities, but also the more broader disciplines from international relations, politics, out into the sciences, and even into the English literature and to the arts field. So for them, it's a passion of being interested in cyber and then bringing their competencies and strengths to handle the complexity that the world's throwing at them, and in this case through the scenario. So that echoed very nicely with our aspirations for the competition, and to allow our students to recognize that there is so much potential for them to contribute by bringing that novel way of thinking, that generational shift in thinking, and with whatever background that they might bring as well. So that really did complement our aspirations for the competition, and our hope that our students can realize that there is such benefit of them contributing to this career and this field. And as we aim to inspire the students who are here today, our hope is that they can identify career paths for themselves, or opportunities, not necessarily even full paths, that can start their journey into contributing to making the world a safer place and helping solve or address some of these problems in a better way. So I'd like to thank you for your remarks. They're absolutely spot on for the competition, and gave us some really interesting topics to consider about the evolutionary shift of warfare, and the fifth domain. As interesting as it and challenging as it is, it's novel to see how organizations, how governments are being called on to act in different ways, and the responsibilities shifting between governments and their use of capabilities in kinetic spaces and warfare, through to their responsibilities to protect organizations and civilians in the internet and digital age as well. So for me, it's a fascinating problem space, and I know our students have been enjoying it in terms of the work they've been doing with our scenario, and I hope they've been appreciating the challenges that the scenario brings and how they relate to some of the real life problems that we're witnessing today and throughout the world today. So thank you very much for that, Paul. That's very much appreciated. And again, thank you for your sponsorship of the competition. And on behalf of the team, thank you to Farsight for the support with the team, Boris, and the workshops and the other events you've been supporting throughout the 2 days as well. I'm just checking there's any comments. At the moment, we've got comments rather than questions. So that's a positive response. But I think if that's okay with you, Paul, I'll wrap up there and hand over to our next keynote. But thanks again for joining us. I know you're joining in from the west coast of the US, so hopefully it's not too surreal giving a morning address late in the evening, and that you can head off and have a nice drink and celebrate the end of a successful day and the start of a new day over here.
It's been great. Thanks for having me. I'm going to drop off. Good luck to
Thanks very much, Paul.
Good luck to everyone.
Thank you.